You're such a love.
Thank you.
Yeah. Life's good.
That's a good answer.
Checkity check and stuff.
Oh, what does everybody think about live water or raw water?
Raw water? Oh, I'm sure it's quite good.
Like raw water?
Yeah, you know that people are drinking, the crazy people?
I think that they need a raw slap.
Yeah.
I drink raw sewage. I go straight to the source.
Cut out the middleman, the middle intestines. Cut out all of it.
It's like
if there's no homeopathic element to it, really.
You got to get the ones that are blessed appropriately.
Right.
But yeah, raw water. Yeah, it's this guy. His name's like Mohidi or something, and he's like this
Hold on. Let's save this for the show. I think this is really great stuff.
Just before the show.
Okay, we are live. We are
We're
rolling.
really live right now.
Okay. Well, let me do an intro. So before we get to raw water,
Look at that guy's face.
before we get to raw water,
I kind of like it.
I'll buy anything he's selling. Welcome to Hack Days. As usual, Hack Days is a group of misfits that gets together every Sunday to talk about whatever comes up. And Hack Days actually is typically filled with nerds just like you and me, working on projects, anything really. So if you're at home watching right now, you can share your project in the link or share whatever your passions are and we'll talk about it, or possibly, we'll talk about it. Hack Days is live filmed at Noisebridge Hackerspace here in the heart of San Francisco in the Mission District. We're over on 18th and Mission, I believe. And if you want to check out noisebridge.net, it's the premier hackerspace where you can come out and hack, obviously. You can get access to a bunch of cool tools and spaces and people. So they have everything from laser cutters to 3D printers to arm saws to whatever, woodworking, machining, whatever. It's a saw to cut off your arm.
But it's also made out of an arm. It's kind of meta.
Right. It is a saw made out of an arm.
That cuts off arms.
Yeah.
When they say the right to bear arms, they mean
Right.
hold an arm that can cut off arms.
Yes.
That's what it's about.
And you can also check out classes and courses and meetups and everything in between at noisebridge.net. We are a non-profit-run, volunteer-run hackerspace that relies on your donations. So please donate. And what else do I need to cover? Oh yeah.
Names.
What? Oh yeah. Let's go around and introduce ourselves real quick before we get started. Starting with
Me? Oh, hi, I'm Catherine. I'm not real. Bye.
I'm Jack. I'm pretty cool. I'm selling something on eBay. My eBay username is EMERGEDBIRCH_4, and I'm selling a stick of what's it called? Oh, Ripjaws G-Skill 8GB. I have 2 of them, and it's gonna end in like 9 hours, and they're going for $80 a pop.
Is this the same thing you've been selling for like 10 weeks?
Yeah, but I lowered it a bunch.
Did you maybe post it to the...
Now's your chance.
You post it to Synapse. See if someone will pick it up.
what it doesn't say is that it was actually owned by the famous Jack from Jack Days.
Yeah.
Here. So my name's Dan Gately. You can find me on Twitter at DPG. I am the CEO and founder of Synapse.ai, and I'm just here to talk nerdy.
I'm James Sundquist. I do theater. I'm hosting a audio meetup here at Noisebridge at 4 p.m. today. I'm doing them on and off, but now I'm advertising more for people who built their own instruments and want to share them with other people. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, it's like custom built music gear like that.
Whoa.
Super cool.
Hey!
That's awesome.
So if you build sweet music instruments or visual or VJ equipment and you want to come share it, eat snacks for 90 minutes, you can show up at 4 p.m. today, or we'll do more meetups in the future.
Nice. Do you have to eat snacks for the entirety of 90 minutes?
We'll do our best. Everyone's supposed to just bring a snack in a project.
That's awesome.
My name is Ignacio. I study computer science and I love programming.
My name's Rex Hoffman. Been a software developer, architect, working around the Bay Area now for the last 10 years. Been in software for about 20. Opinionated, but I'll keep that on the down low.
I'm James Beach. I'm a writer. I'm also somewhat opinionated sometimes, but some people say that and they're just wrong. I'll just put it out there. And I have an author page on Amazon.com/author/James Beach. But I also just yesterday created a Patreon page for the first time, which was an interesting experience.
Congrats.
Thank you. So that's me.
Cool. All right, so our first topic, we kind of already started. Dirty water, what is it called?
Raw water.
Raw water. So I don't know.
No, that's an accurate description.
I posted on Facebook, loving raw water, hashtag bring back cholera. But,
So if people
Bring
aren't,
back cholera.
that's what you get for drinking raw water.
it's retro. For people who aren't familiar, raw water is this movement to have water that's without all the artificial things like, a lack of bacteria, treatment.
Yeah, purification.
They irradiate it with UV light. Scary.
Well, they do. Oh, yeah.
Wait, regular water or raw water?
Regular water.
Okay.
Regular water. You know why they do that?
What?
So that when you drink it, you don't get sick.
Yeah. So raw
Well,
water.
that's what they want you to think.
Yeah. Don't do that.
Government, don't drink out of the tap because the government is putting fluoride in your water, which are secretly little nanobots. They'll crawl into your brain and live there and control you.
And just make you think critically.
So raw water is. Where do they find raw water?
Both of you are
Is it-
doing the most right now.
Is there a particular source where I know that this is from a spring, or is it literally out of the back of someone's truck and they pull up to Whole Foods and
No.
they're like, here's some water?
It's literally out of a drain.
Really?
You get it directly out of the drain, and you know it's real.
Nice.
Because
The
you got
chunks.
that yourself, and then you
So,
drink that yourself.
has anyone here ever drank well water?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but
So it's
But
fairly
well water has to be tested.
agreed.
yeah.
I'm not saying that. So while we can make fun of people's crazy views, which are crazy, it is important to note, and Kyrgyzstan did a really good 7-minute episode on this week about one thing to get out of homeopathy is to actually talk to your patient when they come into the doctor's office. I recently went I normally don't like going to my doctor's office, and I went after 3 years. And you get shunted around. Talk to your doctor for 5 minutes. The placebo effect is really what homeopathy is playing on. And this is what Kyrgyzstan called out, was that basically if you make people think that something will make them better, it might actually do that. And if they feel better, then they might get more physically active, and that can create a virtuous cycle of behavior. So while as a marketing and capitalistic ploy, it's a terrible idea, I could easily see telling someone, hey, I've got some magic water for you.
Yeah. So there is definitely some possible benefits to homeopathy and a lot of actual benefits to it. It does seem that a useful line to draw is instead of science.
Yeah, no,
Like, it seems
definitely
good
not.
when it's like, seems good when it's on top of. So if this guy was like taking water that had been treated and saying that he then blessed it,
Oh, fair enough.
then that would have less of a problem.
I grew
Or
up
even
with
saying well water.
Yeah, I grew up with two things. I grew up with blessed water in our house, right? That came from the Vatican. It sat
enough.
on the mantle. I don't know what it was good
Are you
for.
serious?
Oh yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
awesome.
You
I
should
went to
bring it,
private
you should
Catholic
drink
school.
it.
This is
So
the
you
thing.
have like a vial of holy water on the
Correct.
mantle.
Correct.
In case of vampires, break bottle.
Exactly. Exactly. Two, we were conditioned for this. Think about it. I played a lot of Zelda when I was young, right? And that water, that blue water,
Indeed.
really helped. And so, like, to find magic water now is almost like you're living that fantasy, right? I don't know. Might be something.
There might be something to that for like why we have this sort of drift away from evidence. Now that's playing into people's. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
So
Live it every day.
Well, sure, we are in it. It's basically where people who aren't experts in something think they know everything about it because they don't know anything about it. They don't think it's complicated. So you might be seeing some more of that as applied to things that have been scientifically resolved, but people don't feel like becoming experts in. And I wonder if that can be playing off of just the magic and the fantasy that we enjoy in movies, and just wanting to think from that things are simpler than they are.
Why don't they just change the name of these places to potion shops? You know, like if we're going to that length, and Whole Foods is like, yeah, whatever, or Rainbow's like, whatever, just put whatever you want on our shelves and we're cool with that. Just turn it into Hogwarts. Like, give us a potion shop, and just let people buy magic neon glowing water.
Well, I think
No, because your neon water is garbage and mine is awesome.
Right. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity here already. Where there's competition, there's money.
But I think that it's all about placebo. Like, if someone has a headache and they're like, oh, can I have the Advil, right? Can I have an Advil, which is normally 200 milligrams? And I was like, oh, these are the extra strength that are 500 milligrams. Be like, oh my god, because they have that. It's like,
My headache's been blown away.
my headache's been blown away, even though they just got the 200 milligram. So it's kind of like, you know, kidney damage. That's like extra kidney damaging Advil.
Reductions for that stat a little bit.
Yeah. Advil's not great.
So with placebo effects, there are some interesting things too, and it does seem to possibly operate as if it's affecting the software rather than the hardware, right? But it's affecting how your mind thinks things are, which is then maybe altering some aspects of how the hardware is operating. But it can have interesting effects with placebo too, such as what happened with Prozac. People are familiar with that?
Oh,
Wait,
my
is
dog.
Prozac a placebo?
They tested Prozac against the placebo, and the placebo did better.
No. My dog takes Prozac, so he feel better. I mean, we gave him Prozac, and a few months later, he started eating all of his because he was really anxious. He wouldn't eat all of his breakfast, and we gave him Prozac, and a few months later, he started eating all of his breakfast. Because he got really skinny, and then he filled out a little bit. So Prozac works.
As long as it worked. That's interesting that what was he diagnosed as having?
I don't know.
Doggy depression.
Basically, he sits on the couch the whole day, and he just shakes.
Placebo effect is actually noted.
He shakes the whole day. He shakes and barks. It's
So he just shakes like a junkie all day.
Yes, the whole day.
But okay, so the placebo effect, talking about that, we have a case where an animal who cannot conceive
Does
of
everything
the
to
placebo
placebo, yeah.
effect,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
he has no context by which he can understand what you're giving him matters in any particular way.
Didn't look it up. This Kyrgyzstan video from last week. Highly recommend.
I saw that one.
Actually mentioned that the signals had a owner might give their pet could be sufficient to cause a placebo.
To be reading the mood of the owner as he's giving
More
them
attention, things
more-
like that.
And here's the thing that will make you feel better. Oh, you're all better, and acting as if your pet is better will help
Interesting.
get your pet better.
I mean, we do put it in a pill pocket. So, you know, those little pockets that they're little treats, and then you stick them in, and they have holes for pills, and then they eat.
And all of that is wrapped in Adderall.
Yeah, that's what I eat.
The dog is doing wonderfully.
That's right.
I have a very similar experience with the placebo effect, but in the music side of things. So I was a subscriber of Spotify, right? So the regular MP3 kind of music, and then Tidal came up and they offered this .FLAC files. So they said, okay, this is way better because objectively you have files that have a bigger kilobytes per second.
It's higher resolution.
Yeah, it's high resolution, so you should see the difference. So I put my headphones and said, wow, this is objectively better. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I started paying the hi-fi subscription to Tidal, and then I decided to make a test. So it's called the ABX test. And they give you the same music in a MP3 format and a Tidal format of FLAC, and you should be able to select which one is better, right?
But doesn't it come down to the frequency response of the drivers that you're listening to the music through? So,
Yeah.
right, okay.
But I mean, it should. If you have two files and one is MP3 and one is 4 times the amount of kilobytes per second, you should be able to notice the difference. I was not able to
Really?
at all, and it came up to a thing like it was a placebo effect all the way because all the time I was like listening to the same thing. I was not
believing it was better, so you were enjoying it more.
But sometimes
That's
it's
it.
worth it to feel the placebo. Like sometimes somebody will like do something, you know, is making me feel so much better, and I don't ruin the placebo for them. But
So how much raw water can I sign you up for?
You can buy a 1 liter orb for like.
Or first of all, the units of these are literally in sorcerer units. You can buy a cauldron of raw water. So I'm curious about the music thing, though, because I think with some, you can have MP3s that don't have noticeable artifacts, and that, in essence, the frequencies that they squash aren't necessarily identifiable.
They're
right?
not even audible.
Right. So, I mean, you can have some that mirror, I think, but, I mean, especially when it comes down to the type of cans you're wearing, headphones that you're wearing. Like, what type of headphones?
I was using the noise cancelling from Bose here, so I mean, you can like.
Buy other sound equipment.
I understand
What
the
Bose stands
highest
for.
end, but it should be like, okay, you isolate it from the outside, so it should be like somewhat better than the regular iPhone headphones, right?
There have been studies. There's also been you guys are familiar with the Amazing Randy, which is it's a general debunker of
Wasn't he a
supposed
magician?
psychics. What?
At one point, wasn't he a magician? At one
Yeah, he
point?
was a stage magician.
Okay.
And he actually and a mentalist, which meant he would be basically doing tricks, reading a room.
Absolutely mental, that one.
He's mentalist, bro.
Yeah.
He's like metal. He's a metalist too. But so he saw psychics doing the same tricks, and he was offended.
Yeah.
So he started debunking would-be psychics, and so he was doing that. But then he also started doing it for audio equipment, because there were places that were selling supposedly like monster cables, or
Right.
a perfect example. Like supposedly they're supposed to make everything better because they're made out of gold.
Right, gold foils.
Yeah.
And just people sinking.
Activity.
Yeah.
People who have too much money, sinking too much money into things like that that don't even work. Like for example, like a gold HDMI cable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right? It's ones and zeros.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's plastic.
I'm wearing one as a belt right now.
Well, then I'm sure. Oh, that's a different case. I'm sure that one
Right.
really
It's
gets
It's
more.
just status at this
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
What's
But-
the deep?
Or like
But so he expanded. He had this challenge of like $1 million for someone who could prove psychic phenomenon was real that no one ever collected.
Sure.
So he expanded it to audio cables, and still no one was accepting it. Because if especially if it's like ones and zeros, it's not like one group of ones and zeros is going to be shinier. Like either it all gets there, or there's static, but it's not better.
Well, it's error correction rates. Anytime you're going to send a signal, you're going to have some form of error correction. And if your error correction is sufficient, you're going to get the full signal across, if you actually care about the quality of the signal.
Right, but that is not going to be affected by the material of the ones. Either the ones and zeros get through, or they don't.
For the most part, yeah.
Is it so when considering the conductivity of copper versus the conductivity of gold-plated copper? I don't think it matters, right? In
Agreed.
essence, yeah.
But also, if the information doesn't get through, then it's just static. It's not like the information will get through and then be sharper on gold.
So
It either will transmit or it won't, but it won't be better.
A digital signal can get delayed.
correct, and
Right.
that has to do with error correction. So if you have a signal that comes through and it's like, oh, I'm missing parts of this, please resend.
Right.
And then I can assemble this in the correct way later. Then there's some delay. There's
Right.
also delay with time, right? As like if you had the end receiver of some sensor data and you are across the Pacific Ocean, right? It does take time to get a signal there, right?
Sure, but would it be even under those circumstances? Would it be that much slower with gold as opposed to copper? Because we're talking about light speed, crossing a couple thousand miles, trying to feed data at most at like 60 frames a second.
And last time, if I recall correctly, I think copper is roughly 2/3 the speed of light for signal transmission, but I could be wrong.
And then gold probably isn't full speed of light. Then maybe that's
No,
like
definitely not.
3/4 or something.
Gold is the full speed of light. I love that.
Definitely not.
As far
If you
as
get the right gold, it is. My
Okay.
gold.
Okay.
Your special.
It's not watered down by the government.
placebo
Do you sell it? And you
Yeah.
sell it in orbs. Got
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So as far as the audio test and the hardware side, like two thoughts I'll share. So on the software side of things, if people want to hear the difference between different audio files, you can go on NPR's website, and look up NPR MP3 FLAC, spelled FLAC, MP3 FLAC challenge or something like that, and you'll find it. And they do an audio comparison between 128 kilobit MP3, which is quite low, 320, which is quite high, and FLAC, fully lossless audio wave file. So I think it's just a straight wave file, just audio file.
Yeah.
So you can listen to the three, and it'll just play A, B, C, and it says which one is the highest resolution. And it does this for a dozen different kinds of music, and then it tells you what you scored. And it's interesting. So if you want to do that, you can do that with whatever headphones or speakers you have. And then on the hardware side, I feel like the important parts of music when you're listening to, just assuming you're listening on headphones, is first it's the device itself. Some devices sound better than others. Like the iPhone actually puts out quite high quality sound. It sounds really good, the audio output. Something like a Raspberry Pi has really poor audio quality, which is why you have to get a USB digital audio converter or something to improve the sound quality, because that would lower it. So there's that. Then there's a preamp you can use to drive your headphones to try to boost the signal for a better sound. And then on the headphone side, it's about getting ideally a flat response. And flat response just means if you're an actual musician, if you're Quincy Jones and you're recording Michael Jackson and producing him, you would want headphones that had a flat response, which means every instrument sounds exactly the way it sounds plugged into the sound system. You're
With
not
no coloring,
you're
no
not bass
improvement on
boosting.
any
Yeah,
of it.
there's
Yeah.
no bass boost, there's no anything. It's just you're just hearing exactly what the person is doing, and that should be what you're going for if they're doing a good job. And if it's not, then you would hear it. So ideally what you would hear with FLAC, it's not necessarily even good things, but famous example would be like Led Zeppelin. You can hear the squeaky bass drum. So you can hear the guy's squeaky bass drum. In the Beatles, you can hear the backing tracks. So you can hear the backing tracks leaking in to what they're listening to when it's recording. It's getting
So
captured.
their headphones are going into the microphones while they're
Yeah,
singing.
so you're hearing, they're listening to like a tambourine, or a count or something. And you can actually hear it weird in like strange places in the mix at different points. So it's interesting. It's like details, or I don't know. Another thing I would feel like with really high quality audio is you would hear a thickness to the sound, which you also hear at really low quality. At low quality, the sound is being compressed, and that just means that notes that might be really quiet and subtle, like you're still hearing them, but in a more overt way. And then when you get more kind of space, because you have quality headphones, you have quality sound, then you're hearing more of, you hear more of this idea of stereo separation. Even in mono, like in the Beach Boys, so high quality, you can hear separation between the tambourine and the bass guitar or something. But you can actually feel like they're away from each other. That's interesting.
Compression artifacts can be very interesting in music in general. A lot of the times what we're hearing on the radio just ends up being compressed because radio is broadcasting in a narrower band of frequency than a CD. So you can get a lot of cases where the radio sounds better than the CD, it just sounds more pleasing because it's been compressed, and then people would buy the CD and be sad because it didn't sound as good as what they heard on the radio.
Moral of the story for those at home is don't ever become a wine expert.
Oh my God.
Just learn to appreciate things simple. If you're making something, feel free to become the expert.
I would really like to see a placebo test for wines. I know there's been some for blind taste testing where there was effectively no detectable difference between a $50 wine and a $200 wine.
Try a 20.
That is not always true.
Yeah.
I have tasted some really shitty $20 wines, and I have tasted some really amazing $200 wines.
Well, 50 to 200. You get, but I mean, maybe even there can be some. Of course, there could be some wine that's just
There's just
objectively
so shitty.
awful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad things in life. Learn what you like. Do what you like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you like complaining about things, then
We have a podcast.
Yeah, we have a podcast for that. The best way to do it, actually, if you wanted to do an NPR, maybe the coolest way to do a music comparison would be to go to a Best Buy, and they have that pro audio room with the really high grade speakers. Plug in your phone and listen to the music samples, the 128, 320 MP3, and the uncompressed audio file on the best possible stereo, and see if you can hear the difference. Because on anything less than the best, you really cannot hear the difference between 20 and uncompressed. In my opinion, it's really hard to hear the difference because they both sound good.
Yeah.
That's how I would describe it.
So speaking of the wine comment, there's something called the Judgment of Paris, which I don't know if anyone's aware of this. It's a Paris wine tasting of 1976 known as the Judgment of Paris. It sounds awesome. Was a wine competition organized in Paris on the 24th of May 1976 by Stephen Spurrier, British wine merchant, in which French judges carried out 2 blind tasting comparisons, one of top quality Chardonnays and another of reds, Bordeaux wines from France, and Cabernet Sauvignon wines from California. A California wine rated best in each category, which caused a surprise as France was generally regarded as being the foremost producer of the world's best wine. Spurrier sold only French wines and believed that the California wines would not win. The event's informal name, Judgment of Paris, is an allusion to the ancient Greek myth. So, you have a lot of preconceived notions, right, that you go into, like, participating in something and making these decisions and having these conceptions that something has to be a certain way. When in reality, it most likely isn't, right?
Yeah.
Judgment of Paris being one of the biggest upsets in wine history ever because the French were so...
The real, something I see as a mini-cosm of that is the way various waves of coffee shops roll out. You get to enjoy a certain type of coffee, and then something slightly different comes along. And because it's slightly different, it is now better. And I would not be surprised in the least if that had affected the Judgment of Paris. That this wine was cut from many of the same grapes and
Breeds of grapes and just
replanted. Oh, even sometimes cuttings and just replanted. But it's slightly different. Ooh, this is better.
Yeah.
I haven't experienced this before. That novelty.
Right. There has to be some bias for that.
There is actually a psychological, it's been tested psychologically, a similar thing of just like the first thing and the comparison, where they would just have something like 2 people interviewing, saying the same things, being roughly the same, and even being switched back and forth. And the second interviewee was generally better, was rated higher, just because of the comparison factor, just like that. So it can even make a difference when things are tested if it's just very much perceptual based.
Interesting. Has anyone tried the coffee that monkeys poop out?
I've looked for it. It's hard to find the Civic coffee.
Wait,
do you
have tried
like
it?
regular coffee at all?
I mean,
As a cat.
before school, I'm drinking regular coffee, but then I crashed so hard, so I don't really drink it anymore. But I do.
Around recess?
Yeah, I crashed actually around lunch, but I do. I have drinking that. My parents went to Bali. We all went to Bali, and my parents ate durian. I couldn't push myself to eat that.
It's so disgusting.
What is that now?
Durian is a stinky fruit.
It's the stinkiest. It's one of the stinkiest foods on earth. Besides this terrible Swedish food, basically, it's actually.
Besides the rotting fish food in the earth.
Well, it's fermented, so that could be very offensive to many Swedish people.
So what about the coffee?
Okay, so I mean, I just had to sip. It was pretty gross. It was good. It's like
It was
they
pretty
feed
gross.
them.
It
They
was
feed
good.
them to
Not lemurs.
lemurs. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They feed them to lemurs, and then the lemurs poop them out. They scoop up the poop. I think they dry it, they grind it, and you run it through.
Do they rinse it off ever, or is it?
What would they get out of rinsing off the poop?
I think they do. I think they
Yeah.
use sand or they use something to sort of like sift it, like clean it up.
Yeah.
The original
Some process.
The original rationale was supposed to be that these civets would only be picking the best beans to eat.
Right.
So what came out of them would naturally be
So free
the best
labor.
to start with. Yeah.
Well, I
Great.
think it's that I can't remember if this is like exactly correct, so sorry if I'm totally wrong, but I think their body absorbs part of
That's what I
what's
heard.
on the seed. If it's the acid
The
or,
husk or something.
There's something that mellows out what you're having because the animal's body, like,
Right.
by passing
Processes it.
through it, yeah, it's processing the thing in a way that's like making it more enjoyable.
So I was asking if you had a baseline for regular coffee. Like, how would you compare it to regular coffee?
I don't remember. I was 9.
He likes
Okay.
He likes Folgers.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, it's crystals.
It's the crystals. Yeah, the flavor crystals.
Everyone does tend to get very snobby about their coffee or anything that they think is a special ritual in which they can engage. I had a coworker. He had bought some Folgers-esque Mexican coffee that had the chicory in it. It was quite tasty. We had our regular coffee system set up. We had our cold presses, and we had our French press as well. But to be able to just sit there and make the instant coffee and be able to enjoy it, you know what? It's okay to be a little trashy at times, people. You don't have to look down on everything. It's okay.
You can lower the standards a little bit. You can enjoy something. You can enjoy a good cheeseburger for sure.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Or like
Not all the time.
like sometimes my parents don't are super snobby about sugary drinks. They're like, no, you should get something fancier. And I'm like, I want a Slurpee, and they're like,
Slurpees are tasty.
they are so good. Like I have 2 a year. But,
Well, they probably
when
have
I
enough
have
chemicals
them-
to balance out the raw water.
Yeah.
So-
Or if I should drink the raw water, right, and then the chemicals will get into my stomach, kill all the bad
bacteria,
things, all the
exactly, yeah.
bacteria from the raw water.
Just stay away from the distilled water.
Bad stuff.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we've driven this conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we're done.
I went to Fry's with my dad recently because we needed to get my computer up and running. Or my dad. Well, I'm giving my mini PC to my dad because he needs it for his video conference. So
Okay.
his video conference setup.
Where are you going with this?
And we went to Fry's, right? So they,
Like electronics store.
yeah.
Video conference. Fries.
Got it.
So basically, to get this computer running, which is a bare bones one that I like, it still has most of the stuff in it, but it's a mini PC, so it doesn't have the RAM or the
Why did you go to Fry's to get this thing running?
2.5 inch SSD. So when we go there, we pick out everything. The lady is like, "Oh, that's out of stock." And then we look on her computer, and it's not out of stock, and she tries to upsell us. So I get in this giant battle with this lady about her upselling us at Fry's.
You
Did he
yelled
did
at
he
a
just-
lady?
Well, she was trying to upsell us for like $100
Well,
for
so-
her commission.
Did you write a really angry Yelp review right there
Yeah,
in front of her face?
Did you or your father call her out on it? Like literally, like why are you trying to upsell us?
Yeah,
We
a
can
little
see
bit.
that on the computer and you have it.
Yeah, she was like, "Oh, it's just a server error," and eventually we got it right, and she got it up on the thing, and she was lying to us. It wasn't a server error.
Sure.
So, and then it says that the RAM's in stock also. So we get the SSD, we get the RAM. So we go to the thing, and the guy spent 20 minutes looking in the RAM cage for it. And they come back to us with the wrong brand of RAM, Viper, and he's like, "Sorry, we couldn't find the crucial." And it's open. It's ripped open.
Oh my
And
god.
it doesn't even have a discount. And we're like, could we get a discount on this? And he's like, "It's been tested."
Yeah, we
So,
want it because
did
of the
they pay
testing.
you to take the RAM? I want to know the end of the story.
Yeah.
Did they actually pay you to take the RAM from them?
No.
Oh.
They tried to get us to pay full price for an open box of RAM.
So do people at Fry's get commissions or are
They
they?
do.
Okay.
But Fry's is just so, it's terrible these days. Like a Micro Center has everything all lined up. Like literally there'll be book bags, vacuum cleaners, trash cans, mother.
Oh,
What
oh,
any of that garbage? Just
They'll
give me
march
the
people
video.
through a canyon of point of purchase
Yeah.
sales. It's
We
amazing.
got it all. We got your vacuum cleaners.
I like that it's called
Trash cans.
Micro
Like,
Center,
where's
and
the-
now it's like we sell microwaves as well.
Well, it's not Micro Center. That's the good one.
Oh, okay.
And then the bad one's Fry's.
Right.
But there aren't any Micro Centers in California these days because they all closed down. And Fry's seems like it's on the brink
Yeah.
of bankruptcy.
All right. So this episode is brought to you by Fry's Electronics.
Serving you
Yeah.
not what you wanted
Yeah.
for
Serving vacuums since 1980.
Make sure that you ask for Mary when you come to the Fry's store.
Tell her you know Jack.
She'll hook you up.
Wow.
Tell her you know Jack. She'll upsell you. Bro.
Yeah. Don't dox people on the show,
Yeah,
Jack.
what if she's watching?
Sorry, Mary.
So is anyone working on any projects lately?
No.
Anything cool? Anything?
I can talk a bit about what I tend to be working on.
Yes.
And so my background is trying to corral large groups of programmers, think 200 plus, to make sure that their software actually all works well together. This actually brings up several interesting things. Number one, I'll assume that most people here are familiar with Chomsky's hierarchy of languages and the hierarchy of machines. One of the things that I've been contemplating and working toward and about quite a bit is the fact that we use sledgehammers to break walnuts. You don't need a Turing-complete language to solve something a regular expression can solve, or push down automaton. Applying this in large, already existing software systems tends to be quite hard. There are languages out there that I think need more attention. Noether, if no one's heard about that, is a research language that tries to cover the 13 hierarchies of machines that people now discuss. It's not the 4 you learned about.
So that's a project you're working on right now? Or?
What I'm working on right now is a way to turn the startup of Java-based systems. This is usually written in Spring, very popular language, gaining more traction now, and turning that into a compile time safe solution, much like Dagger.
Okay.
And using Java's annotation processing tools to do it. Kind of nerdy, but and maybe a bit more than we want to get into here.
Well, there's a friend of mine who has problems with Java as a language.
Oh, every language is terrible.
Sure. He would argue that Java is one of the worst languages. Let me just channel him right now.
Okay, go for it.
He hates it because it's, in his mind, overly verbose and it has terrible security.
Verboseness I consider to almost be a non-issue. And the reason for that is if there is sufficient tooling for any language, completion is sufficient, readability for any large system is key.
So the argument would be, as a programmer, if it's hard for you to think in it, it's harder for you to program in it.
Well, thinking in it is not necessarily a function of verbosity.
But verbosity can hurt your ability to think in it.
It potentially could. The problem that I think is more likely is either incredibly dense abstractions or if you are too terse, then the meaning will be lost on those not familiar with your part of the system.
Particular way of phrasing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But these are, I think, very superficial problems with the way that we program today. And by that, I mean everyone has different coding styles, and I like to think of Python as code golf. Can I do it in 3 strokes or less, 2 strokes or less? Fewer lines is better.
So, and what would a Java be as a sport analogy?
Java is definitely a team sport built for larger teams. Maybe think baseball. Maybe think, but yeah, something along the cricket's a good. Yeah, fair enough. Touche. The real rub in every programming language is you want to write something that can stand the test of time and be fit for purpose. Particularly if you're going to do something that's shared with a group of people. If you're just solving your pet problem for yourself, do it. Do it in whatever. Do it with what you're comfortable with. If you're going to share it, do it in something that other people can see and reason about and prove the correctness of. Would be the most interesting part of this. There's research. There's like you guys have used AWS for anything. They didn't. It was Microsoft that used COQ, a COQ programming to prove the correctness of some parts of their S3 competitor. And being able to reason about these things or getting a machine to do the reasoning about it for you is quite interesting. So this is where I'm trying to collapse the startup of large applications.
When startup, you mean the phase of how long it takes for them to be able to operate in their setup process?
It's interesting to think about the constructor on any object-oriented programming language. Every constructor is very different than every other method on that class or in that object definition. A constructor is talking about a completely different concern. If you are thinking about it from a coupling and cohesion perspective, as soon as you put a constructor with those other methods, you've already broken something quite interesting and valuable. The ability to run those methods
Without
which
that.
should be functions, without that expressed desire for this state to be surrounding those methods. And that's where the failure mode really is in most programming languages today. Because people can't reason about the context or find a good way to declare the context that they wish a function to run in. So you can chain functions together, but some of those functions will need to be run first to, say, populate a cache.
Mm-hmm.
And so so then that is what you mean by startup, like how quickly it can run through loading in all the different things that it generally needs to assemble in a somewhat linear process. Like some things have to start before others can refer to them, which they will need to start. So that's what you mean by a startup process.
Yes. And there's definitely a purely functional programming languages can easily be transformed. This is not true in object-oriented programming languages. There was actually a great paper in the 1980s written on this, that these forms of transformations to delay startup or delay computation could actually be quite harmful in object-oriented programming language.
So there'd be processes to like don't start until all this other stuff is complete.
Or until it's needed.
Okay.
So it's really a lazy reference.
So it's trying to be like,
So think Scala's lazy references. Now use that lazy reference to instantiate something or initialize something incidentally.
So the principle behind people doing that would be just-in-time compiling. Like you don't, but if you're getting a hit at that point because you don't have it loaded already.
So just-in-time compiling is a great example of, well, a better example would be Python, because you could change something on the fly and only, if you're using PyPy, but the desire of only computing what is needed when it is absolutely needed is something that most languages lose. You could do it probably in a Lisp, fairly straightforward. Beyond that, you're going to be struggling.
Well, there would be a difference between scripting languages and compiled languages there too.
Compiling is just your first test. A lot of compiled languages, Java for example, the thing that I will always ask in an interview question is if someone knows about Java lang proxy.proxy. And this generates a class on the fly.
Okay.
And if I can do that at runtime on the fly, sure, it's a compiled time language. Watch me generate hundreds of classes. These distinctions really, I just view compile as the first test.
Sure. Okay.
And what I'm trying to do, what I've done with this APT Spring project, which is actually open sourced by Salesforce, github.com Salesforce/APT Spring. If you're interested, and you want to have APT. We actually had to build a good incremental compiler for this as well, which is all listed. But I just thought I'd share because I've gone and talked to lots of interesting folks about this stuff, and thought I'd bring it up here because people were. But I think it's mostly interesting because it points at some of the failure modes in our way we program today.
Interesting.
And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm super fascinated at what I have not been a part of, which is pretty much everything you've said. I'll be honest, no, because I have friends that are literally speak to the things that you just talked about, and I'm curious, like, what your background is and how you came
to do this.
Yeah, and to these conclusions, right? That this is something that you need to do and participate in.
A couple of reasons. I kind of feel that we're playing with fire with technology today.
In what sense?
In many senses, in that if you have an operating system you can't trust because you can't prove to yourself that it's going to act in a safe way, your security is always the security of at the margins of trying to prevent access rather than trusting the system that you've built to be reliable. And as we build systems to control more and more of our society today, not having something you can prove to be correct in a very mathematical sense of domain and range. You're taught these things in algebra. You can sit down and you can reason about the input and output of every function if you wanted to.
And you still remember it.
Or you can have you can actually have a computer verify this across every function.
Well, I was meaning still remember it after high school.
Oh yeah, fair enough. But just my career has been one where I've, it's, the slow, you just see slow disasters performing in the majority of software that we build and rely on.
Because it's not provable, it inherently is,
There aren't sufficient constraints.
which introduces bugs and
Allows human beings to introduce bugs.
interesting. So this whole area of study, I looked up something here. I looked up provable software, which
Yep.
might be a thing.
It is.
There's formal verification.
There are.
Seems to come up in this search.
Yep, and so that's the the Calc language, COQ, is interesting in that it is a language and a prover at the same time. I think this needs to become more mainstream, so that as people are learning to program, they don't get just a compilation error or a warning that they're referencing a symbol that doesn't exist, but that the domain and range of this function that you're using here does not match the input you're giving it or the output you're receiving. If you're doing anything on the blockchain, for example, and you wanted to be able to prove that